Hi, everyone. So my name is Catherine, and I am presenting on behalf of Group 6 with Kat and Desiree. And we decided to speak on decolonization with a twist of understanding oppression in kind of more of a modern day as well, especially kind of adhering to the United States in comparison with Native culture and other oppressive stances. So for this instance, we all had different interpretations, which I think is a really great thing. Situations like this should be kind of more semiotic and able to be malleable for each of us, which I think can kind of create a positive spin at the end of this based off of our findings and how we understood things through different lenses, which kind of just relates to the entire topic as a whole. So I want to start with the idea that I don't think I'm addressing the elephant in the room with oppression being an entire stance that's, it's made pretty obvious throughout all of our anthropology pieces. A lot of investigations, observations, what have you, are definitely kind of an underlying piece with a lot of what we go about reading. And I think to make an understanding of this, there's a piece that I read, and it's a reflection on Native anthropology. And I think it was really interesting because it kind of made sense of the real reality and the conversation that we don't have, which is anthropology in its own breakdown is kind of the observation of other observations as far as human life and culture goes. What have you. That's kind of like my little take on it. And for that reason, I think that above all, anthropology having stemmed from kind of Western ideology and people that were wanting to observe indigenous cultures ended up being this kind of weird system where these people would come in and investigate other cultures. And to be entirely blunt, for the most part, it started off predominantly with like white culture investigating other cultures. And that is kind of how we all read into it. And so I think we can already kind of come up with a real solution to the issue, in that being that observations and withholding culture and values as individuals and as societies would essentially mean that we would have to play the court fairly, and all of us would be able to kind of be intrusive on each other's ideas and appreciating one another over kind of any other appropriation. So I think I know that this is kind of like an interesting course for me to go down, but I think it's something in anthropology that I've always wanted to look further into and make sense of. And when it all comes down to it, it's kind of just within respect and context of the pieces and how I kind of decided to read into everything. And so my personal take is just kind of the question at hand of how do we recycle the past in more of a productive way, and to make sense of these things being implemented is the idea that Western ideologies in American culture has been so dominating that it has hindered other cultures in some way, being kind of it's kind of made sense of being like a push where it's like one for all, and that's really all you get. There's really no other, let's divert away from that. Let's have these sections of people who are going to celebrate one way or another, and we call it good. Because I think the reality is in an era of globalization and postmodernism breaching over us is kind of understanding that while we can be appreciative of cultures, it's kind of turning into this whole hodgepodge of everybody just kind of intersecting one another. And what we forget is, as far as dominant cultures go, is that it's easy to overlook the idea that minorities and situations of oppression are actually occurring because people in power who are the dominating cultures, they kind of see above the water, where it's like everything is okay because I'm okay, so why make sense of anything else? And it's not to say that anthropology has done that. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's more so just based around that idea, again, that I'll say, where when you are observing one's culture and reporting back on that culture as you know, in American just kind of ideals or Western ideology, and you're looking for and through the lens of somebody else's culture and exploiting that to the rest of the world, it can kind of it can be manipulative in its own way, rather than allowing for, let's say, a native to be able to speak on behalf of their own and observe another culture, and kind of eliminate that social class, because that needs to be recognized in the midst of all of this. And that kind of is what I mean by that kind of bias opinion that takes place with researching oppressed cultures. And for me, I think that means that's kind of a big thing as far as it goes when we are, you know, when we're talking about natives, when we're talking about minorities, from that kind of standpoint, I think it makes more sense to allow the person and the beholder themselves to have that conversation and to have that voice. Because as it all comes down to it, I think that we started to create these terms where we were like civilization and culture and identity, what have you. And instead, it's really easy to read into any piece in anthropology and notice that a lot of it has actually like has placed Western in front of those terms. So if you're reading into it, it'll be like Western civilization. It's not civilization as a whole, as a planet of people with very diverse and individually beautiful beliefs. It's kind of just, here's this flat line of how Western civilization is going to be. So I think that was a really interesting observation for me as well, which is kind of still playing into that idea that these things could be made sense of. And I'm not looking for a solution to solve the problems in the world. It's kind of just the idea that voices should be heard on like first account. And that's kind of what I've picked up a lot through this kind of research and study that we have been doing. So to move forward, one of the personal things that I started to really look into and take interested in is that, you know, it's for one, it's not a secret that there are that oppression has been very consistent throughout history, as far as human beings existing goes. So I think I want to touch on the idea that I think that our visions from the past most definitely served with oppressive actions. And in today's world, it's kind of more making sense of what is politically accurate in some form to make sense of. And what I kind of want to touch on is the idea that I recently, kind of more of a personal experience, had a friend who wanted to dress up as a Native American for Halloween. And she is a white female American, just like myself. And I kind of hinted at the idea that that was not so good of an idea. And the reason I say that is because it plays into the idea of cultural appropriation and the way that we are, we make it okay to kind of take these pieces that have been so just brutally hindered and kind of oppressed over time entirely, and have been discriminated and kind of overpowered by the dominance of colonialism like kind of coming forth. So I think that rather than dehumanizing different cultures, it is still really important that we share values. I think that sharing value and culture is entirely different than kind of appropriation in the way where you take something like that and run with it. And so I kind of was thinking about what a positive experience would be from cultural appreciation. And the way that I tie into that is kind of, I mean, I grew up overseas, so I am, I think I'm American by standard, but I will tell you that I've lived in Ghana and Turkey, and I think I've mentioned that in the past. And when I moved here to the United States, I think there was kind of a role reversal in my head where I was like, oh my God, I'm around so many American high schoolers and this is frightening. And that's not how I feel at all, but I'm just saying that the kind of reversal. When I moved here, I had always been covered in just recycled glass beads that I would get from Ghanaians in villages and whatnot, and from all the places that I had worked with them. And when I came back, it was really important that I kind of shared that wealth and culture of knowledge so they too could support a community that meant a lot to me in my growing experiences. And I think that's kind of a positive example of appreciation in the sense where you can uplift both beings and just kind of celebrate the idea over like I said at the beginning, over one observer and not two. So yeah, that is my portion, and thanks for listening. I will pass this along now. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Desiree Segura. I am a part of Group 6 and I am here to discuss decolonization and ethnographic work for our project on the Natives Talk. Decolonizing anthropology is an important aspect in recognizing the work done today by anthropologists in creating equalization of the subjects being studied. Native representation is essential and important for minority populations because anthropology as a study of people and cultures needs to be better represented for oppressed natives for accurate views of their cultures. So why is this important, and especially why is it important for anthropology? For myself, I'm being a minority student in the field of anthropology. I want my culture to be represented accurately and under the best intentions, not to be viewed as a lesser culture, nor to be seen as any less important to that of some Western European cultures. I chose to approach examining decolonization by examining my own perspectives and that of being a Hispanic woman and seeing how that affects me and how I view my own culture, as well as how I view other cultures when I am viewing something that is not familiar to myself. As a field, anthropology takes on a misconception of being a racist study because it has taken a stance in the past on the idea of there being a superior race and a lesser race. Without decolonizing anthropology, we risk the issue of creating hierarchies that could oppress other cultures that are seen either in less important or inferior. This is where decolonization plays an important role for anthropologists. Decolonization has a purpose of rethinking the way knowledge is obtained and shared among different cultures, allowing for people who are being studied to have a voice in sharing their own culture accurately and from their own perspectives. To share their knowledge and understandings rather than allowing a non-native to view them and report based on their own biases about the people that are being observed. We create an equal platform for the equal representation by doing decolonization within anthropology. One way of doing so is through ethnographic research. Ethnographic research allows for better representation in anthropology studies. Along the lines of decolonization, anthropology for better representation of Native cultures being studied, we begin to see a need for ethnographic research, where researchers have created a systematic way of observing other cultures from their view of the subjects being studied. Ethnographic studies allow researchers to observe a culture's values, beliefs, behaviors, and languages. When a researcher decides to study a specific culture using ethnographic research methods to be more specific, they immerse themselves within the culture, and they gain a sense of why specific rituals and customs are practiced. This is the best method of research for Native representation because the element of immersion for researchers allows them to experience what it's like to live and be a part of that culture through the eyes of the Native people. Rather than actually taking numbers, going into the field and looking at how we perceive or what we believe to be true, which could also be anything from stigmatisms to perspectives that we are raised to believe as a part of this Native culture. We are actually becoming a part of this culture, joining in with the people, and allowing them to represent and share their culture with us so we can accurately share and represent their culture with the rest of the world when we report back. This is why ethnographic research is important. The methods and study tools that we use in ethnographic research allow us as anthropologists and anthropology students to gain a platform for these people, to see things through their eyes, to allow their voice to be heard, and allow their culture to be the best representation possible without fully understanding it for ourselves because we were not a native, nor did we grow up and were raised with these cultures and ideas. For myself, my own culture, if I was to have a researcher who wants to study what it means to be a Latin American today, they would be welcomed into my home. They would have the experience and traditions of family values and what they hold as important, such as unique foods that we cook, the methods of cooking, our language, whether it's spoken in Spanish or Spanglish, which is a mixture between English and Spanish, very common and very popular in most Hispanic heritage or Latin American homes. They would see our dances, they would experience our music, not to mention they would see the value of family structure within the household. I use my own culture as an example here because Latin Americans are considered a subculture within America. And just like any other culture or subculture that is around the world globally, Latin Americans deserve representation. And by using the methods of ethnographic research, a non-Latin American has the opportunity to join in on the heritage and learn about the culture. By using myself as a personal example, but showing how ethnography can be used to interpret what other cultures have to offer, through the experience and through the eyes of the native culture is one way of giving the natives a voice to speak. And by giving the natives a voice to speak allows their culture to have a strong stance from being oppressed or being forgotten. As anthropology continues to grow beyond its original roots and stigmas, it's important for us as anthropologists or anthropology students to continue to develop methods and accurately represent people and their cultures. We must be able to think outside of the biases that we assume when we first observe another culture by practicing ethnographic studies. When we observe cultures that are different from our own, we allow an alternative perspective to emerge. And we see things in another light. We see things through the eyes of the natives, whether we realize it or not. By doing this, we can provide a voice to the people whose culture practices identities might otherwise be oppressed. A native voice and perspective allows for empowerment. Empowerment is also important for native cultures in any culture that is being represented because it is the voice in the society on the line. Empowerment can be as simple as equal representation to that of other cultures to as drastic as liberation from the oppressors. By practicing ethnographic studies and methodologies that allow for accurate representation of cultures, we begin to decolonize anthropology for the greater good of all people and for all cultures. I wanted to speak about decolonization in ethnographic studies for the native voice because I felt strongly about it. And comparing my own background in history and culture to that of what is represented in the textbooks, I felt that this would be a good way to show that there are subcultures and subcultures deserve to be seen as well. And Latin Americans are definitely a subculture in the United States that are large and vastly different. And who's to say whether a researcher was to see my version of Latin American versus another of possibly Mexican American? There might be some differences. But this is why giving a platform to the natives to talk and allowing them to have a voice in their culture and a voice in the knowledge that's being passed on to the world, why it's important for us to share and not only allow them to have this voice, but to listen carefully as we analyze and critique their message. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I am Kat from Group 6, and I'm gonna sum up everything my group members talked about, give my own perspective, and find a conclusion in there somewhere. So Catherine started talking about really stepped into a little bit of the background of anthropology, a little bit of sort of the history. All right, well, we have everything based on the dominance of Western cultures. Where do we go from there? Her own experiences, both negative and positive, and even in the negative, how you can make small changes in your everyday life to say, well, no, I don't think that's appropriate, moral, whatever way you want to phrase it, which is not always fun. You don't always want to be, that friend who's saying, can we not appropriate cultures? But I think it's really important because the more people are aware of the fact that they're doing something that's really upsetting to other people, using their culture as a costume, the more they know and the more they can come to terms with that, the easier I think it'll be to change people's minds. Then we sort of switch into Des's perspective, which is a lot of, okay, well, I'm from a culture that is not always doesn't always see eye to eye with this dominant Western culture, and how she wants to be or would rather be approached about ethnography, and how it's a matter of come be a part of this and see, come ask us, you know, be here with us and experience it. And there is a little bit of interplay there with what Catherine said of, well, you're observing observation, you're not really a part of things. But I think that the more interaction we have and the more voices we give to Native people now, whether that's Native Americans, whether that's just a subculture, when we give them that platform, we have the choice to do that, and we have a choice to let them speak for themselves or to speak for them. And if you speak for someone, you have a lot of responsibility. You have to, I believe, and I think the rest of my group believes, you are obligated to give a genuine perspective. Now, that's going to be biased. There are going to be issues with it. But to do your best to show, this is what I gleaned from that experience. This is what that culture is to me. And to be clear about the fact that it's not all, well, this is what I saw and that makes it correct. It's, this is what I perceived. So that was their take. And then one thing that I thought was really important to talk about sort of at the end here is more, maybe not solutions. I don't think I have a great answer to all these issues. But one way to address, well, how do we do ethnography then? We've seen plenty of examples of not doing ethnography well. So then what do we do? And I think that we can look to our past, and especially to marginalized people who have worked in anthropology, to see, what have they done? What do people that don't have the sort of advantages that we do, how do they approach their own work? And I know I talked previously about Pearl Primus, who was a dancer. She did not once publish, but she was an African-American woman who went to Africa. I say Africa, all sorts of places, and I believe West Africa, to dance with them. And that was her experience, was through dance. And then you have Zora Neale Hurston, who was in communities learning about them, really, really full immersion, rather than, okay, well, I'm going to step into these shoes for a minute and then go back to my life. It's very different when you're actually getting the perspectives of the people there and trying to stay as genuine to those perspectives as possible. And one of the reasons I actually brought up Pearl Primus in particular, not just because she's an African-American woman, is that she used dance. And I think that as anthropologists, we do have a lot of requirements we have to meet. Things have to be done a certain way. Studies have to be approved. You have the IRB, you have funding you have to get. There are all sorts of hurdles to jump over, and you have to do things the right way. Well, I think that the more adventurous we get with our ethnography, the more, one, we can possibly connect with people through dance, through music, through other mediums, through really experiences. And we can use things like, Marty's a big fan of video. What can we do to use that lens? And rather than saying, okay, well, this is our, we're the watchers, what does it look like when the person behind the camera is a native, whatever culture they are native to? And so I think that we really need to, across anthropology, discuss, excuse me, how can we synthesize our needs as scientists, what we need to do to get approval, all sorts of things, and how do we really make more genuine connections and work outside of the bounds of, okay, well, I need to write a paper and it needs to be, it needs all these certain requirements. And I think that the more adventurous we get and the more we explore things through technology like video, again, using different kinds of art, different mediums, I think that is more user-friendly, I'll say. You can show that to someone who's not in anthropology, and I think it's more transcendent. I think, and I don't want to sound like a hippie here, but when you have to read an anthropological paper and you need to know all the background and all these other things, it blocks a lot of people out of having that conversation about understanding, well, what's the point of this? What are you trying to tell me? When you're using something like video or like music or like dance, people get that. They don't need to be necessarily told. They can have, I have a friend here, Kat decided to join me. You can say, well, here's what it looks like, here's how it feels, and then explain what it means, which I think is more powerful than, however many page paper about a people that, most people won't read. It's not read outside of anthropology. And I think that really hinders us. And we could genuinely find more acceptance from sort of Western cultures to those, those minorities and those people that have been marginalized. If we are able to accurately, and I hate to phrase it this way, but entertainingly, take bits of their cultures. This is the lived reality, and these are people, not subjects. So that's a lot. We talked about sort of past anthropology. What do we do now? What is the experience of someone who is not part of Western culture? And right now, a lot of Americans have ideas about Latinos that's not, they just aren't accurate, and they aren't fair, and they aren't based on true representation. And I think that through anthropology, we can really address some of these issues and help, I won't say make a better world, we're not that cheesy, but foster understanding, or at least provide a way to foster understanding. Thank you guys so much. It's been a crazy semester. I'm so glad we're all almost done. And I'll see some of you guys next year. Thanks.